With Giants general manager Joe Schoen on the hot seat, we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly from his 4 years at the helm.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family. Now, the number one sports podcast group in America. My name is Patricia Traina, credential member of the Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, welcome on into the Blue Crew, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, Giant fans, on today's episode, we're going to take a look at some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of Joe Schoen's 4 years, nearly 4 years on the job as Giants GM. Now, there's a lot of different directions I could have gone in this particular segment, but I just tried to really hone in on the ones that stood out to me the most. So we'll start off with that. And then in segment 2, we're going to take a look at some areas that the Giants really need to improve upon in these last 4 games. Now, the season, for all intents and purposes, it's over. We know that. But these are some areas that I went back. I found some of them were surprising, actually. Areas the Giants need to really improve on if they want to finish strong these last 4 games. So that'll be segment 2. And then in segment 3, some of you guys have asked me what have been the differences, with Charlie Bullen as the defensive coordinator. What differences have you seen since Jackson Dart returned? So we'll look at that in the final segment of the show. So again, welcome on in to everybody. All right, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of Joe Schoen's nearly 4 years on the jobs. Now, there's been some good. We'll start there. All right. And again, I'm just going with the ones that are kind of the low-hanging fruit in this instance. But I think we all can agree that the Brian Burns trade has been really, really good. Right? They got Brian Burns. They didn't have to give up a first-round draft pick. Burns has paid off thus far. So I don't think there's anybody out there. I'd be surprised if there was anybody out there who has a problem with that acquisition, just given what Burns has brought to the defense. All right, a couple of other things real quick that I think have been really good. The signing of right tackle Jermaine Illuminor. Jermaine Illuminor remains one of the most underrated signings of the Joe Schoen era, but a very valuable one. Jermaine Illuminor has been solid for the Giants. He's been pretty much consistent. He, doesn't miss very many games. He's likable. I think a lot of fans like him on his social media account, and he's just been a good player. So, I mean, it's been a while since I think we can honestly say that the Giants have had 2 good offensive tackles on the team. So Andrew Thomas, Jermaine Illuminor, they've just been absolute bookends. They've been rocks on that offensive line, and a big reason why that offensive line is doing so well this year. All right, and then I think the other thing we've got to give Joe Schoen credit for was the gamble he took in waiting to acquire Jackson Dart in the trade. Now, Jackson Dart, there was reports that Pittsburgh might be interested, that this team might be interested, that team might be interested. So Joe Schoen could have taken Jackson Dart at number 3, and then, of course, that would have meant not getting Abdul Carter. But he rolled the dice, took Carter with the 3rd overall pick in the draft, and then waited, and was able to move up to get Jackson Dart. And it looks like the Giants have their franchise quarterback finally for the next decade plus, assuming that Jackson Dart doesn't, continue to run haphazardly out there and take hits that he really shouldn't be taking. But that's another topic for another time. So those are some of the good things that I think really stand out over the 4 years that Joe Schoen has been here. Now, let's go and look at some of the bad. Now, the difference to me between bad and ugly in this segment, stuff that has bad is stuff that I think has been, you know, recurring but is fixable. Whereas ugly just it's not really fixable. So let's start with the bad. All right. One of the things that I don't like that I think falls under the bad is his free agency negotiations and cap management. Now, by that I mean he had offers on the table for Julian Love after the season was over. Julian Love decided to shop around, and Joe basically said, okay, you know what? You don't take my offer. The heck with you. I'm pulling it off the table. And his thinking was, well, if I leave the money out there, then I don't get this player, I don't get that player, which kind of leads me into the next thing that's really bad. And that is how he goes about putting together contracts. Now, as the GM, he has final say, jurisdiction, if you will, over how the contracts are structured. Yes, the Giants have a cap manager. That would be Kevin Abrams. But the absence of not using voidable years, you're going to hear me say this a lot, and especially if Schoen is retained and we go into the, off season with him as the GM, you will hear me say this a lot. I will scream this from the mountaintop. Use voidable years. A good cap manager, right? For those of you who don't know what voidable years are, basically you give a player, let's say, a 5-year contract, but of that 5 years, it's actually a 3-year deal with 2 voidable years. And the 2 voidable years are designed to lessen the impact of the guaranteed money, or the prorated signing bonus, I should say. So let's say, for example, player signs for 5 years, 2 of them are voidable. The signing bonus is $5 million. I know that's kind of low, but let's just use that as an example since it's round numbers. That means that the prorated signing bonus will hit $1 million per year. So the first 3 years, $1 million each. And then the last 2 years, because you have voidable years, now what happens is, depending on how you designate the contract or the transaction, whether it be a post-June 1st or a pre-June 1st, you're either going to get hit with $2 million in dead money or $1 million that year and then $1 million the following year. The reason why voidable years works is because if you project the salary cap accurately, it's going to go up every year. So $2 million in dead money in 2025, for example, is not necessarily going to be as big of a percentage against your cap in, say, 2028, because the cap is going to go up. So that's why voidable years is such a good tool. And, I've said this before, the Eagles use that tactic a lot, which is why they have money to spend on free agents, all right, amongst other reasons. So that would be something that I think is just bad, that Joe Schoen has done a bad job with. And, I get it. When he first came in, the cap was a mess. He had a lot of dead money on the books, and he still had some dead money this year. The Daniel Jones contract, for example. But that was going to come off the books this year anyway. There was no reason why he couldn't, in my opinion, at least as far as I can see, there was no reason why he couldn't use voidable years in contracts that he signed guys to in 2025 to kind of spread that money out, so that once their tenure, if you will, ran out, the dead money, the way you structure it, you can manage it. All right. And he just hasn't done it. So that's something that I think has been a bad approach by him, something that if he is retained, he needs to change. All right. Now let's talk about the ugly. The ugly, as far as I'm concerned, repeated roster mistakes. For example, Graham Gano was injured and on IR for 2 years in a row? And yet they brought him back. And the reason they brought him back is because they went with the devil they knew. At that point, when you have a guy who is injury prone, shouldn't you have a backup plan? I mean, the team got burnt how many times by the kicking situation because they just stuck with Graham Gano, the devil that they knew? So that was just, when you make the same mistake over and over and over, what's it going to take to get through to you that, you got to go in a different direction? So that was something I just absolutely did not like. And then the other thing that I think was just really bad, overvaluing some of his guys, his draft picks, and not trading them. I go back to last year, Aziz Ojulari. They were holding out for a fourth, and I think the best offer they got was a fifth. All right. Better to get something than nothing. You could sit there and say, oh, we're going to roll the dice and we're going to see if we can get a comp pick. Comp picks are not guaranteed because it depends on what you do in free agency, what the guys sign for elsewhere, and so forth. So they're not guaranteed. Whereas if you're trading and you're saying, okay, well, I really wanted a fourth, but I'll take a fifth, you're at least guaranteed you will get a pick that you can use the following year. With a comp pick, you can't use that pick until I think that the year after. So it just made no sense why you would hold on to these guys and not look to trade them. And the same thing goes for this year. You had Russell Wilson, who obviously doesn't fit into the plans anymore. Evan Neal, who they kept on. I don't know why. It was clear that, Evan Neal didn't work out. So why hold on to him, especially when you were deactivating him every single week up until he landed on IR? Jalen Hyatt's another one. Didn't work out. So why hold on to them? Why not see if you can't get a pick for them? Now, maybe they didn't get a pick. I don't know. Maybe they didn't get any offers. But why tie up the roster space when you could have used it elsewhere? So that, to me, that roster management, and I haven't even touched on the draft, which is a topic for another show, but just the roster management and the decisions that they've made at certain positions, ugly, plain and simple. All right. So those are my thoughts on the good, bad, and the ugly. And by the way, those of you watching on YouTube, if you want to weigh in on your good, bad, and ugly of the Joe Schoen era, I'd be interested to see what you think. All right. Now, coming up next, the Giants are on a bye. The players are off, but hopefully they're locked in. And hopefully these last 4 games, once they return from the bye, there's a lot of improvement. What are some areas where they need to improve, both as a team and individually? I'll get that to you right after this. Hey, Giant fans. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. You can choose from a huge range of unique stats, including fantasy score, field goals attempted, free throws made, turnovers, whatever fits your strategy. The early payout feature is a great bonus. When your lineup starts strong, you may get the option to cash out early. And the new stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, like more on a quarterback's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. So go on and download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineups. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. And before we get into the next segment, everydayers, I have an announcement to make. Make sure you mark your calendar for Monday, December 8th. We've got an exciting announcement that you will not want to miss. Stay tuned for that. I'm really excited about this one. I can't wait till December 8th comes here. And I hope when that announcement is made, I hope you will be as excited as I am. All right, let's get into segment 2, and that is some improvements that I'd like to see the Giants make, that I think they need to make, it both on an individual and on a group basis. All right, and I have 3 for you. First one I'm going to give you is a group with some data. Now, this is all per True Media. Drop passes by the receivers, tight ends, and running backs. Per True Media, the Giants have 18 drop passes, and that breaks down as follows: 3 on first down, 8 on second down, 6 on third down, and 1 on fourth down. Leading the way in drop passes this year, Tight end Theo Johnson, who has 5 of the 18 drops. And of those 5, ladies and gentlemen, 4 have come on the money down, which is third down. That's got to change. I mean, no question about it. That has got to change. All right, the next area. This is a low-hanging fruit item, but we're going to talk about it anyway, and that's the run defense. Opponents are averaging 5.8 yards per carry, which is dead last in the NFL. There have been 59 rushes or 10 or more yards, dead last in the NFL. There are, there's a 13.8% stuff rate by the run defense on rushing attempts, 27th in the NFL. All right, run defense has been terrible. Now, let's break this down a little bit further. According to Down, the opponents are averaging 5.6 yards per carry on first down, 6.2 yards per carry on second down, 5.6 yards per carry on third down, and 3.8 yards per carry on fourth down. So that ranks 31st, 32nd, 25th, and 23rd, respectively. Not good. If your opponents are averaging nearly 6 yards per carry on first down, you're facing a lot of second and shorts. And that pass rush that you have that's so great is neutralized. So obviously that's something that has to be fixed. All right, now I also took a look at tackles for loss. All right, so on first downs, the Giants have recorded 11 tackles for loss on running plays, which is 31st. On second downs, they have recorded 12, which is 16th in the league. And on third downs, only 5 tackles for loss, which is tied for 21st. Yeah, the run defense has been terrible. And I don't know if it's a lack of talent. I don't know if it's execution. Maybe some of it is scheme. I really don't know what the reason is, if there is a solid reason for it, but it's got to be better. Hopefully these last 4 games and then carry it into next year. All right. The third area where improvements have to be made, believe it or not, red zone. The Giants are tied for 28th in red zone conversion rate with a 47.62% conversion rate. They are 31st in the league on goal to goal, which is 55%. All right. Now, this is kind of interesting. I went and I looked up to see what was the best combination, the best receiver, running back, tight end combination on red zone plays. And it's one that we probably won't see again this season. But I'm going to reveal what that one is and give you the numbers. Right? Actually, let me give you the numbers first, and then I'll tell you what the personnel package looked like. So, in terms of the league ranking, this particular group is tied for 31st in terms of efficiency, averaging 17 yards per game inside the red zone and 6 points. They have scored a touchdown. All right. So, what's the combination? You'll never guess it, folks, and you'll probably be stunned. But here it is. At running back, Devin Singletary. At tight end, Theo Johnson. At receiver, Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins, and Jalen Hyatt. Pretty wild, right? And, just in terms of yardage, in terms of production, that has been the skill set group that has been most effective for the Giants down in the red zone. That just blew my mind. It just absolutely blew my mind that, it would be that group. But that's where it's at. Now, obviously, you bring back Malik Neighbors next year. You bring back Cam Scatterboo. I would expect they would be amongst the combination of tight ends, receivers, and running backs that'll be up there in terms of red zone production. But that one absolutely blew my mind. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, what were some of the differences with Charlie Bullen running the defense? And was there any change with Jackson Dart having returned to the offense now with Mike Kafka solely in charge of planning the offense? Well, we'll talk about that right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up tomorrow, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View is going to pop on by for some laughs. I mean, I got to bust on Ed, which I always do. But we're going to talk about, some bye-week thoughts, what Joe Schoen had to say, where the Giants go from here, and just kind of, all things Giants like we always do here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So, Ed will be here. I'll be on his show, as we often do. And I hope you'll tune in for those two particular shows. All right. In this segment, I wanted to see what the differences were with Charlie Bullen running the defense versus Shane Bowen. Now, keep in mind with Charlie Bullen, it's a small sample size. So these numbers will probably change. But I just wanted to get an idea of what was new, what did he do differently. And then I'm going to tell you about Jackson Dart and how they handled him a little bit differently, which, quite honestly is not as noticeable, but we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so let's look at Bullen. All right, let's look at what he did. So according to SIS, here was a breakdown, the percentage breakdown that he ran in terms of the defensive formations. He had a 3.35 on 32% of the snaps, which was ranked 6th in week 13. 4.34 was 16% of the time. That was, let's see. Then we had a 3.26, 12% of the time, ranked 3rd most in the league in week 13. 4.25, which was 12% of the time. A new formation that hadn't been run under Bowen, at least according to SIS, was a 4-1-6 formation. So that was kind of new. That was run actually 10% of the time, or the second most time, or ranked second in terms of the league. Then there was a 2-4-5 ranked that he ran 6% of the time. So I went back and I said, okay, how many times did he run a 3-man front versus a 4-man front? On a 3-man front, he ran it 42% of the times, 27 plays out of 63. A 4-man front, they ran it 30.1% of the time, 19 plays out of 63. All right, so that's what Bullen did. Now, again, that's a small sample size. It's only one game. Let's just kind of look at what Shane Bowen did in weeks 1 through 12. All right, Bowen, in terms of a 3.35, ran that 29% of the time, which was ranked in the top 10 at number 10 league-wide. He ran a 4.34, 18% of the time, which was ranked 7th in the league. A 3.26, 7% of the time. 4.25, 12%. And let me see, a 2.45, he ran 11% of the time. In terms of a 3-man front, Bowen's numbers out of 695 defensive snaps, 334 times. So 48% of the time he ran a 3-man front. A 4-man front, 33.2% of the time, 231 times out of 695. So I know it's kind of hard to compare the two. You're not really comparing apples to apples, but, we'll see if that continues with Charlie Bullen, if he, continues to use these different fronts and put more of an emphasis on 3-man or 4-man fronts. But those were some of the kind of, defensive personnel alignment changes that came out. Now, obviously, that's going to change depending on the opponent. So, that, and it also can change based on, how the game is flowing. But overall, I mean, Charlie Bullen's first game as defensive coordinator, not very good. And not, so much because of the scheme, but a lot of execution problems, especially in the defensive secondary, which I thought was the bigger of the problems. I mean, the defensive secondary, they were playing with a full house back there. They had Adebo back, Cordell Flott, Tyler Nubin, Javon Holland. I didn't think the Giants' defensive secondary played that well, to be honest with you, in Charlie Bullen's first game as defensive coordinator. So we'll see if that improves moving forward, obviously, but that's a summary of some of the differences. Now, for those of you wondering about Jackson Dart and design runs, Dart only rushed 4 times, and according to True Media, none of them were design runs. They were just scrambles, all right? That was probably because the Giants were behind all game long. That would be my guess. So rather than run the kid and, just to catch up and whatnot, I suspect they backed off on trying to, use his legs to catch up. Now, I apologize. What I should have done is I should have seen what they've done in the past when they were behind. I did not pull that, but I'll look to pull that, for another show, maybe coming up. But yeah, Jackson Dart, as far as I could tell, as far as with design runs, you know, I suspect it was because they were behind all game long. So why put him out there and why expose him? Now that being said, on the scrambles he did have, he, you know, he took some hits and he basically is like, look, I'm going to play my game. This is football. I'm going to get hit. Yes, you're going to get hit. But why go looking for trouble when you can live to see another down? And that's kind of the challenge they have with him, and that he hasn't quite understand. He doesn't quite understand that toughness is great. It's a quality that's admired, but so smartness. And I've made this point before. Eli Manning was as tough as they came back in the pocket. Okay. Now, I know Eli was not a scrambler. He was not a runner. But Eli, when he had to, he moved around in the pocket to get out of trouble. And he also knew when to go down. He learned how to slide. You might remember years ago, he hired a baseball coach to teach him how to slide. That's what Jackson Dart needs to do. He's trying, he's shown that he's willing to slide and not take hits in his mind, not take the hits. But I don't know about you. I'd like to see Jackson Dart have the kind of longevity and consistency with games that Eli Manning had. I know that's impossible because it just doesn't happen very often. But I'd like for Jackson Dart to be a little bit more judicious about when he runs and takes a hit versus when he doesn't have to take a hit. So, put that on the list of things that need to improve, I guess. But we'll see what Jackson Dart does when he comes back. Again, there's 4 games remaining after we get through the bye. So it should be interesting as we play out the string, or the Giants play out the string, I should say. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. For your next listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast with Tyler the Madman Rowland, who gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow with Ed Valentine here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Have a great one.